Berserk is a hyper-violent epic manga series created by Kentaro Miura back in the 90s. It is iconic, it is a legendary manga series, it is um, one of the best fantasy epics to come out of Japan, and maybe even possibly one of the best there is. It is absolutely worth checking out. There has been a couple anime adaptations that have attempted to capture the greatness of that series, but you can't beat the manga. They still haven't, probably never will. But, um, full disclosure, I am not fully caught up on the manga. I haven't read every volume necessarily. I made it relatively a chunk or two past the Golden Age arc, which is the the portion of the story that really establishes the world, really introduces us to all of the characters, and sets up, the themes that are going to be carrying out through the whole series, because the manga is still ongoing. It is still being written. So, this isn't going to be about the story. This isn't going to be about the plot, even though I could probably make a couple hundred videos, probably parsing through all of the amazing themes and characters and all sorts of stuff. But no, I want to talk about Guts, the protagonist, the main character, the driving force of this series, and why I think he's probably the best anti-hero of all time. Why he's probably the best there is when it comes to that archetype. Guts is a lone mercenary who has suffered many great losses and sacrifices long before we even get to the main thrust of the story. He's introduced in the manga as the Black Swordsman, a feared and hate-driven, battle-hardened bastard. And it's at first it's hard to imagine why we would follow this character, why he would be the protagonist, because he seems so brutal and so merciless when he's introduced. But then we get the Golden Age arc, which establishes his origins. It shows us where Guts comes from and why he is this tortured warrior that is cursed to fight monsters and demons and all kinds of things in this fantasy world. So then we get to the Golden Age arc, which is basically a very, very long backstory. It shows us where Guts comes from. He's an orphan. He was a bounty hunter for many years until he meets the Band of the Hawk, which are a special group of knights. Well, sort of. They're kind of like self-proclaimed knights. They're an individual group. But anyway, through them he meets their incredibly charismatic leader, Griffith, who eventually becomes the incredibly powerful villain of this series. But we're not going to get into that too much, because better to read it for yourself. But Guts eventually loses this camaraderie that he discovers with the Band of the Hawk. He finally finds a place to kind of call a family, or you know, among these other warriors. And at some point in this Golden Age arc story, he loses all of that. Griffith, the main leader of the Band of the Hawk, betrays him, and he loses all of his comrades. So, for the remainder of the story, he is forced to bear this curse, this horrible curse that draws all kinds of evil demons and monsters towards him. No matter where he goes, no matter where he travels, he is doomed to be hunted down and pursued. by unspeakable evils, brought on by Griffith, who gives up his humanity and becomes a demon. So, what makes Guts so fascinating as a character is that he has nothing to really fall back on to keep him from becoming just a complete villain, just a complete wicked soul that is fueled by nothing but revenge um, for his comrades. He just wants to find Griffith, kill him. You know, he's driven by hate and anger and regret, and he is this torn, beaten, battered warrior who's lost an arm and an eye, and he carries around this massive sword, and, you know, it doesn't exactly sound like a hero, because Guts is not a hero, not in the conventional sense. He's an anti-hero. But even on that level, he is so merciless and brutal. There is so little to keep him from going completely unhinged, which he does at various points in the story. Which makes you wonder exactly what is it that makes him the protagonist. Why do we still root for Guts throughout the story? Why do we still care about this guy? Even though we know what he suffered, even though we know what brought him to this point. And at the end of the day, even though he is killing lots of monsters and demons, and, you know, that's fair game, he, at various points in the story, comes very close to taking innocent lives as well, and sometimes indirectly does just that. So what exactly is it that keeps this man from, you know, becoming the biggest monster in the story, which is actually a big theme in Berserk? You know, the kind of tightrope he walks between becoming a complete monster that has no mercy for anyone, beast or, you know, man or beast, and, you know, keeping his humanity intact. You know, can he even be called human anymore at that point? Well, what makes the story so great, what makes Guts so great, is that he doesn't have anything to fall back on. He doesn't have a moral code. He doesn't have, you know, he's not Luke Skywalker. He doesn't have some Jedi code, or you know, there's no black and white line to you know, to divide, you know, where he's going wrong or where he's going right. You know, it's a world of pure chaos, the world of Berserk. You know, there are no heroes and villains in this world, and any that there are, you know, they're self-proclaimed heroes and villains. They're, you know, it's false. So it's a world where that is, you know, being eaten alive by this other dimension of monsters and demons that are basically just humans that have given up their humanity. They're in a world of such brutality that they succumb to giving up their humanity and becoming demons instead. So that's a theme that carries over into other characters that Guts encounters. Many of the apostles and monsters he encounters are basically just former humans that did go unhinged. They did go full berserk, and, you know, for one reason or another, usually because of the kinds of adversity or suffering that is pretty relatable in the real world. You know, it could be something as simple as an abusive home life, you know, or of some village girl or whatever, that and then she becomes one of the major villains later on, or, you know, a character that has been persecuted or tortured unfairly, or, you know, whatever the case. Most of the villains in Berserk are basically just former human beings that were pushed to the edge just as Guts was, or is, consistently throughout the series, again and again. But that's exactly what makes Guts so fascinating, is that he never completely gives in. He never completely becomes the monster. We get flashes of it. We see that he goes berserk, throughout various arcs of the series, and each time, there's the danger of him losing that little bit of humanity he has left, that little shred of light that is still there. And when he hesitates and falls back on that and is able to pull himself back from the brink, he's not falling back on, again, codes or morals or anything like that. It's just the human spirit. It's just pure perseverance, which is not only incredibly relatable, perhaps more than Luke Skywalker, I would even say. In a strange, unconventional sort of way, Guts is, he's more relatable for all of us than, than somebody like Luke, or, your typical hero's journey character, who usually has some sense of right to fall back on, usually has something, that they can turn back to when, they're losing themselves too much in the hate or revenge or whatever. Guts only has his humanity to fall back on. And it's fascinating in a world like this that is so dark and brutal, that is so, Game of Thrones, kind of levels of nihilism, where, again, there are no heroes and villains in this world, really. So it is a world of pure chaos, and within that chaos, the only thing Guts has to fall back on is his humanity, which is why Puck is so important to the story as well, because when he loses the Band of the Hawk, his elf sidekick, Puck, is really the only character he has to remind him of that little bit of light that's left within him, that little bit of purity, and it's actually pretty brilliant when you think about it, because he is a comic relief character. He is, he'll break the fourth wall and, provide really the only levity in a manga series that is, pages and pages of dark, brutal drama. Puck works because he is that remaining good that Guts has. He is that little bit of potential left to hesitate, to draw his sword back and not cut down every last enemy he comes across. There's still some room for mercy left in his heart, which is, awesome, because he's such an extreme character. There are so many times in the manga where, out of context, he just seems like a monstrous villain. But in a world like Berserk, he's probably the most sincere character in that sense, as far as all the warriors and knights and harbingers throughout the series. He is fighting on nothing more than that little bit of humanity he has left underneath all of that anger and rage and ferocity. And I think it's fascinating. I think, to me, that is the perfect anti-hero. That is the perfect anti-hero, and that's why I think Guts is one of the best anti-heroes in all of fiction. So that's my thoughts on Guts. And if you haven't read the Berserk manga, you really should. It is totally worth it. Great story. I hope to catch up to it wherever it is right now someday. But that's all I wanted to say about that. If you would like to hear more of my otaku knowledge and little bits of info and thoughts, you know what to do. Like and subscribe. And of course, as always, live for the passion.